The crisp autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves, a quiet promise of change drifting through the world. Emily sat at her kitchen table, the golden morning light streaming through the window, casting a warm glow over her neatly arranged breakfast. The rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee curled around her as she absent-mindedly flipped through the pages of her favorite magazine. Life had settled into a comfortable rhythm since she married Mark, a beautiful home filled with laughter, shared dreams, and the reassuring constancy of love. Yet beneath the surface of her seemingly perfect life, a quiet restlessness stirred. Her gaze wandered to the framed photographs lining the walls, capturing moments of joy and milestones they had built together. She smiled, touched by the memories they held, yet somewhere deep inside, an ache she couldn't quite define had begun to grow. She thought of the days when life felt like an adventure, when love was exhilarating and new, when passion had burned brightly without the weight of routine pressing it into embers. The soft vibration of her phone against the wooden table snapped her from her thoughts. She reached for it, curiosity flickering in her chest as she read the unexpected message, "I'm back in town. Can we meet?" Her breath caught. The name on the screen sent a ripple through her, unraveling years of carefully tucked-away emotions. Jake. The past rushed back in an instant. Jake, her first great love, the man who had once consumed her every thought. Their marriage had been wild and passionate, built on dreams and intensity, but ultimately, life had led them down different paths. After 3 years, they had parted ways, the weight of their differences pulling them apart. She had long since convinced herself that chapter of her life was closed. But now, staring at his message, she wasn't so sure. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, torn between two impulses. Ignoring the message would be the easiest choice, the safest one. She had a life with Mark now, a life she loved. But there was something about Jake's words, something about the mere idea of seeing him again, that sent an undeniable thrill through her veins. After a long moment of hesitation, she typed a reply. That evening, anticipation coiled in her stomach as she entered the softly lit cafe, her heart pounding with an unfamiliar excitement. And then, she saw him. Jake sat at a corner table, a confident ease about him, as if time had barely touched him. His dark hair was slightly tousled, and when he looked up, his familiar grin sent a rush of heat through her. The years had done nothing to diminish the effect he had on her. "Emily," he said, standing as she approached. His voice wrapped around her like a warm embrace, stirring memories she had buried long ago. As they hugged, the feel of him, the familiarity of his touch, sent a shiver down her spine. They settled into their seats, and just like that, the years between them melted away. Laughter punctuated their conversation as they reminisced about the past, recalling stolen kisses, late-night adventures, and whispered dreams. He listened to her in a way that made her feel seen, his eyes lingering on her with a quiet intensity that made her pulse race. The chemistry between them was undeniable, electric. But as the night stretched on, reality slowly crept back in. Mark. The thought of her husband waiting for her at home filled her with guilt, a weight pressing heavily on her chest. He was steady, kind, unwavering in his love for her. He was everything she had once dreamed of. And yet, as she looked at Jake, at the man who had once set her heart on fire, she couldn't deny the pull of something she thought she had lost. As they stood to say goodbye, Jake leaned in, his lips brushing against her cheek, his breath warm against her skin. The touch sent shivers through her, igniting a fire that she had long since convinced herself had gone out. "Let's not wait so long to do this again," he murmured, his voice laced with something unspoken. Emily could only nod, her heart racing as she turned to leave, the sensation of his touch lingering on her skin. The days that followed were a blur of emotions. She found herself distracted at work, her mind drifting back to Jake, to his voice, his smile, the way he had made her feel alive. She tried to ignore it, to focus on Mark, on their life together. But the spark had been rekindled, and with each passing moment, the embers burned hotter. She told herself their meeting had been innocent, that it was just nostalgia. But then she met him again. And again. Each encounter chipped away at the walls she had built around her heart. The thrill of secrecy, the intoxicating rush of stolen moments, it was a dangerous game, and she knew it. But with Jake, she felt like the girl she used to be. Carefree. Desirable. Wild. One evening, he took her to a rooftop bar overlooking the glittering city. The wine was rich, the air electric with unspoken words. He leaned in closer, his voice low, intimate. "Emily, I can't pretend anymore," he said. "I want you back in my life." His words sent a jolt through her, cracking something open inside her. "Jake, I can't," she stammered, her pulse roaring in her ears. "I'm married." "I know," he said, his eyes locked onto hers. "But what we had was real. You feel it too. I know you do." His words cut through her like a blade, forcing her to confront the war raging inside her. The stability of Mark. The passion of Jake. The safety of love versus the thrill of desire. The guilt was suffocating, but the temptation was stronger. Days turned into weeks, and the line between right and wrong blurred with every stolen glance, every whispered conversation. Mark began to notice the distance between them, the way her mind seemed miles away. Each time he asked if something was wrong, she forced a smile, reassuring him that everything was fine. But deep inside, she was unraveling. Then, one fateful night, an argument with Mark ignited into something raw and painful. The words between them were sharp, laced with frustration and misunderstanding. And before she knew it, she was in Jake's arms, her lips pressed against his, the world around them dissolving. In that moment, she made a choice. She would embrace the passion, the fire, the intoxicating thrill of what Jake offered. Consequences be damned. But as she pulled away, breathless and trembling, the weight of her betrayal crashed over her. The streetlight cast long shadows as she stood frozen, the crisp night air wrapping around her like a ghost of the woman she used to be. What had she done? And more terrifyingly, what would she do next? She felt alive, yet an overwhelming sense of guilt washed over her. What had she just done? She had crossed a line she could never uncross, and the weight of her actions pressed heavily on her chest as she drove home. The silence in the car was deafening, the hum of the engine doing little to drown out the whirlwind of thoughts racing through her mind. Her heart pounded as she replayed the events of the evening, over and over, each memory cutting deeper into her conscience. How had she let it go this far? She had always prided herself on being loyal, yet here she was, tangled in a web of deceit. Mark was waiting for her at home, completely unaware of the turmoil brewing inside her. When she finally stepped through the door, the familiar scent of home enveloped her, a stark contrast to the storm raging in her chest. Mark sat in the living room, half watching a game on TV. As she entered, he looked up, a warm smile breaking across his face. "Hey, you. How was your evening?" Emily forced a smile, her hands shaking slightly as she took off her coat. "Just went out for a walk," she lied, the words tasting bitter on her tongue. The weight of that lie settled onto her shoulders, heavy and suffocating. She needed time to sort out her feelings, to make sense of the chaos she had invited into her life. Mark's eyes softened with concern. "Did you clear your head?" "Yeah, I think so," she murmured, barely above a whisper. They settled into a comfortable silence, yet Emily felt like a stranger in her own home. The warmth of their life together dimmed under the shadow of her betrayal. Days blurred together in a tangled mess of contradictions. She went through the motions, laughing with Mark, sharing meals, going on their routine weekend hikes, but her mind was elsewhere. She was trapped in an emotional tempest, torn between the life she had built and the intoxicating thrill of her rekindled connection with Jake. Each meeting with Jake was charged with passion and nostalgia, awakening feelings she had long buried. Yet with every rendezvous, the guilt gnawed at her, threatening to unravel everything she had once held dear. She began to question herself more than ever. Was she chasing a fleeting thrill? Or was there something deeper pulling her back to him? One evening, after an especially emotional day, Emily found herself texting Jake. They agreed to meet at a secluded park, a place where they could talk freely, away from the world's prying eyes. As she drove, her heart pounded with anticipation and anxiety. This meeting felt different, like a turning point. Under the soft glow of the park streetlights, she spotted Jake sitting on a bench, his silhouette framed by the trees. As she approached, he stood, concern etched into his face. "Emily, are you okay?" he asked, his voice laced with urgency. "I don't know, Jake," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I can't keep doing this. It's tearing me apart." Jake stepped closer, searching her eyes, reading the turmoil behind them. I understand that this is complicated, but what we have is real. You can't deny that. His hand reached for hers. She let him hold it for a moment, then slowly pulled away. I know, she whispered, her throat tightening. But I love Mark. He's done nothing wrong. I can't hurt him like this. Jake's expression softened, but his words remained firm. Then why are you here, Emily? His voice was quiet, almost pleading. You know what we have is special. It doesn't have to end. A lump formed in her throat. I need to figure things out. I can't keep living in two worlds. It isn't fair to either of you. Jake's face flickered with hurt, and for a moment, she saw the raw emotion he tried to hide. I don't want to lose you, Emily, he admitted, his voice thick with feeling. I still care about you. Tears welled in her eyes as she faced him. I care about you too, she whispered, her voice breaking. But I have a life now. I can't just walk away from everything I've built. I owe it to Mark to be honest with him. Returning home that night, Emily felt clarity wash over her for the first time in weeks. She could no longer live in the shadows of her decisions. The thrill of being with Jake had been intoxicating, but what she had with Mark was real, rooted in love, trust, and years of shared dreams. Sitting on the edge of her bed, she took a deep breath and picked up her phone. Her fingers hovered over the screen before finally dialing Mark's number. When he answered, his voice was warm and inviting, unaware of the storm about to hit. Hey, everything okay? He asked, concern lacing his tone. I need to talk to you, she said, her voice trembling. Can you come home early tonight? A pause. Then, of course. I'll be there in a bit. His tone shifted, worry creeping in. As the clock ticked away, Emily felt a mixture of dread and resolve. She knew that honesty was the only way forward. When Mark finally walked through the door, his presence filled the room with comfort, but also intensified her anxiety. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table, silence stretching between them like an unspoken chasm. Emily could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. Mark, there's something I need to tell you, she began, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. I've been feeling lost lately, and I met someone from my past. Mark's expression shifted, confusion, then concern. What do you mean? Who? It's Jake, she confessed, her heart pounding. We've been seeing each other, and I lied to you about it. The words hung in the air like a heavy fog. For a moment, Mark was silent, his eyes dark with disbelief. You've been cheating on me? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Tears spilled down her cheeks. It was never my intention to hurt you, Mark. I was confused, and I made a terrible mistake. I love you, and I don't want to lose what we have. Mark stood abruptly, running a hand through his hair. Pain and anger twisted his face. How could you do this to me, Emily? I trusted you. I know, she choked out. And I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. I was struggling with my feelings, and I got caught up in the excitement of seeing Jake again. But it doesn't change how I feel about you. Mark let out a bitter laugh. Doesn't it? He shook his head, his voice heavy with hurt. You chose him over me. That was your choice. I didn't choose him, she cried, her voice breaking. I was lost. I didn't know what I wanted. Mark stared at her, his expression unreadable. I need time to process this, he finally said, his voice hollow. I don't know if I can forgive you. As he turned away, the reality of what she had done crashed over her like a tidal wave. She had jeopardized the love of her life for a fleeting moment of passion. The days that followed were filled with silence and regret. Mark moved into the guest room, and the distance between them felt insurmountable. One night, as she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, she realized she didn't just miss Mark, she missed their life. The laughter, the dreams, the love that had once filled their home. After a week of separation, she finally gathered the courage to knock on the guest room door. Mark, can we talk? Her voice wavered. A long pause. Then the door opened. Mark stood before her, his eyes guarded. You broke my trust, Emily, he said quietly. That's not something that can be fixed overnight. I know, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. But I love you, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to earn your trust back.